The analogy I use is that like it's like saying, I've never heard rock and roll, what should I try? And you just give them Slayer instead of the Beatles.
Hello and welcome to My Tiny Bottles, the project where I'm exploring my grandmother's legacy of miniature liquor bottles, one tiny bottle at a time. I'm your host, Tammy Coxon, and today I'm here at Multnomah Whiskey Library in Portland, Oregon with Brett Adams. Brett, thank you so much for hosting us today for these tastings. And why don't you tell people where we are and a little about yourself?
For sure. Thanks for being here. This is super fun. So we are at the Multnomah Whiskey Library, which is a pretty amazing bar in Portland, Oregon. It's 3 bars total, but the main space has about 2,000 bottles on the wall. 1,200 of those bottles approximately are whiskey. And we kind of have whiskey from all over the world, and then about 800 bottles of not whiskey. It's a really fun space if you ever come to Portland, or if you live in Portland. You can kind of nerd out. It's really focused on sitting down and learning about new spirits, new things, and trying those things as well.
It is super exciting.
Yeah. So my job is the spirits curator and the education manager. So I'm in charge of, making sure the wall is stocked with interesting things, as well as teaching our team about what those are, so that when you come in, you can learn about it as well.
I want spirits curator on my resume, right? That's the best job title ever.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun.
All right. Well, when I reached out to you about doing this here and asking what you wanted to taste, I have a list that I keep going of things that are available, and I sent you the list, and you wrote back, no hesitation, the Glenlivet 12, please.
For sure.
Why?
On the list, it was the only Scotch left, I think. So it made it a little easier, and I wanted to keep it in theme. I feel like we're at the whiskey library, we should be drinking whiskey. And I'm also really curious about brands like the Glenlivet that have, they're huge brands, one of the largest, if not largest, single malt in the U.S. And I want to know how they change over time.
Yeah, and this is really an interesting bottle because this, as best as I can tell, probably comes from the 1980s. And if you know much about Scotch whiskey, you know the 80s was the time of what's called the whiskey lock, right?
Yep.
They had massively overproduced. Scotch whiskey got very popular in the post-war period and into the 1970s, but then people started drinking vodka and tequila. And so they had ramped up distillations, started distilling vast amounts of Scotch, and nobody wanted it anymore.
Yep. Well, luckily, we've learned our lessons, and that'll never happen again.
What do you think? 5 years? 3 years?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It is this, and you can see that in the history. There's these ebbs and flows.
Yeah. It's an impossible thing to predict what consumers are going to want, and you would hate to be the person telling your boss that you didn't make enough whiskey when people want it. That's almost as bad as being the person who said we made too much whiskey when nobody wants it.
Right, almost, right? Yeah, they were just like closing distilleries left and right. And so this is kind of interesting, this being from the 80s. This is a 12-year-old whiskey, and that's also part of why it is so hard to predict, right? Especially with Scotch. 12 years, 10, 12 years the minimum for a Scotch. American whiskey, 4 years, 6 years, more typical. But here, because it's cooler and the way aging happens, it takes longer. But so the age statement is always the youngest whiskey in the blend. And on this assumption that they had a lot of excess whiskey in the 80s, like this could have some higher end malts in it.
For sure.
Yeah.
The blend could have, obviously looking for consistency, like you don't want to put out Glenlivet 12 to taste different every time you do it. So it's not just like the place where you just put your leftover whiskey, right? You would sell that to blenders if blenders are buying. Yeah. But you could absolutely make the blend a little more robust, especially if you're just trying to find a consumer. Like you're going to work really hard to make sure that 12 is a very good value and tastes really delicious. I would assume. We'll find out.
Now, you said that you do the whiskey education here. How would you describe the Glenlivet to somebody that you were trying to explain what to expect?
Yeah, well, the thing that I think people misunderstand about Scotch whiskey is that it's all smoky or it's all peated, right? I think that a lot of times when folks are getting introduced to Scotch, they get a bottle of Lafroig or something. It's like Scotch lovers tend to throw people into the deep end of the swimming pool. The analogy I use is that like it's like saying, I've never heard rock and roll, what should I try? And you just give them Slayer instead of the Beatles, or something. And so most Scotch, in fact, is not peated or smoky, and that's a longer conversation. And Glenlivet is a perfect example of that style of non-peated, really approachable Scotch. When it was first developed, they were one of the first brands to go a little bit lighter and introduce more tropical notes into the whiskey, have a lighter kind of profile on the palate. And so it's a great introduction to single malts if you're a little nervous about crazy big smoky flavors.
Right. It's funny you say that about Scotch. Scotch nerds, like rum is the same way.
Oh, yeah.
Here, let me give you this high ester, super funky.
Let me make it horrible for you forever, Yeah.
It's like, no, you'll appreciate that in like 5 years.
Yeah. We find that about 1 in 10 people gravitate towards those strong flavors from the get-go, because I feel like it is a flavor you can taste. Like a smoky flavor, be it, or high ester flavor or something. It's like sometimes everything tastes the same, and then you're like, whoa, I tasted a flavor, and that can be your entry point to appreciating stuff, because it doesn't feel like you're looking for nuance.
Yeah.
But 9 out of 10 people need that softer entry point.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's just crack this one open and see.
Absolutely. I'm excited.
I've been having good luck today with opening bottles, so we'll see if that continues. Yes.
At least it's not like old wine and bad corks or something, right?
No, but sometimes like they don't crack anymore, and then what do you do? No, we've had some really interesting pours, shall we say? This is the only single malt that I found in Grandma's collection.
Oh, I'm honored.
You said that you thought it was the only Scotch on the list. There were a couple of blended still on the list, but this is the only single malt so far. But certainly during her collecting period, blends were what people were drinking.
Absolutely. Yeah, Glenlivet was one of the few that maintained a single malt portfolio for, I think, most of its operation. But even in the 50s, 60s, it was still like 5% single malt and 95% blend.
Yep. Well, definitely, the nose comes up right away. This isn't at all shy like some of the bottles that I've had.
It really jumps out. There's like that sharper kind of pineapple and apple flavor for sure.
Fruitiness, I get that.
There's ethanol.
Yes.
Spoken through there. So
absolutely.
Whenever I smell ethanol strongly, especially on something that's 43.
This
ABV,
is 43, yeah.
I would assume that the palate is going to be leaner.
Okay.
Like I always think of if the palate is like really oily, it's going to hold on to the ethanol and keep it from like evaporating out.
Okay.
I don't know if that's true all the time, but that's what I anticipate.
And it makes intuitive sense. When I think about things that I've tried that are that way, that does make sense. There aren't as much weight.
There's some pear on that. And like I also think about the evaporation of ethanol, especially in your palate, as we talk to so many people here about, well, what's the word smooth is used a million times over, and for some folks, a lean whiskey where that ethanol evaporates and you don't have a long, heavy, like lingering flavor is smooth. And for some people, when that ethanol evaporates, it burns and that hurts. And so there's no way to be like, I'm looking for a smooth whiskey. Or I'm like, I don't know.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
Right. We can mean totally different things to different people.
Yeah. This is really intriguing.
Yeah. So does it smell like what you expect the Glenlivet to smell?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. I always think of green apples with Glenlivet and approachable kind of malt.
All right, we going in?
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right.
Cheers.
Cheers. That fruit's still on the palate too, right away. My friend Sandra was the one who introduced me to the joys of whiskey. And she always told me, you gotta take 3 sips before you can really taste it.
Yeah.
Because the first one, you just taste the burning.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I always tell people you want to prepare your palate. And that's really enjoyable. It's super delicious. I think it's consistent with the nose.
Okay.
From a flavor standpoint, if we're thinking about the flavor, it definitely is that lighter. You taste it on the top end of your palate rather than like this oily, heavy whiskey. It feels more. It feels lively. It's like jumping around a little bit,
especially for a 40-year-old bottle.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. And it's again proof, I think, that spirits don't change too much on the bottle.
I know. Everybody wants to claim they do. But.
Yeah, especially since this is 50 CL and it's unopened. It's a really good example of...
Not at all well stored, though. So,
So the green bottles.
Generally, the spirits that I've tasted so far have stood up well. Many of the liqueurs don't, but the spirits
That makes sense.
mostly
Like
have.
the sugars and
Yeah.
the lower alcohol really.
Yeah, for sure.
And all the complex flavors probably just like degrade.
This does have a nice finish. You know, that
Fantastic.
fruit sticks around on the finish. Apple, pear, like you said. Yeah, it's just really pleasant. I can easily give this to somebody who was like, oh, I don't know, like.
The maltiness is really clean. You know, I think that, you know, we were doing a sampling of Macallan yesterday, and Macallan is the exact opposite style whiskey. It's really oily and heavy and big.
Right.
And on their younger expressions, you really get this strong maltiness that kind of sits in the back, and that can be off-putting because malt is sometimes a little bitter. And here it's really clean and fresh, and it's a great introduction to single malt, as well as probably in a highball. That'd be really good.
Oh, yeah. Which is how they would have been drinking it, right? In the
Exactly.
70s, like, you know, Scotch and soda, that was the drink.
Exactly. That'd be awesome.
And especially, I mean, even then with the single malts. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, cool.
You know, we think about Scotch and soda as like a blended Scotch kind of thing historically, but once single malts started being introduced, people, I'm sure, were just mixing them that way.
Oh, for sure. So we have a modern Glenlivet.
All right.
And this is at a lower ABV now. This is 40%.
I was wondering about that when I saw the 43 on this.
And so, yep, down to 40% ABV. Obviously, this now reflects, if this is 12 years, this is then 2012. So it's reflecting a very different era of demand for whiskey.
Yeah.
And probably looking at stocks of whiskey and needing to stretch those out, hence 40%. And probably different approach to.
Right. I mean, we have to think about how whiskey distillation has changed. Even just the grains have changed, right? In many cases. Climate change, like so many different factors.
I think that extra 3% really dramatically changes the nose.
It really does. I mean, the old sample really smells like Scotch. It's really got that, you know, that it's just very present.
Yeah.
This one,
we were
a lot lighter.
3% is a huge deal. We were in Islay to visit Lafroig, and we were driving around, and they opened a bottle of Lafroig 10, and it was, you know, in the morning, and everybody was a little bit like, oh, I don't know. And they took a little sip, and they're like, oh, this is easy. And it's 40% over there, and it's 43 here, and that 3% really changes.
Interesting.
So yeah,
and
a lot softer.
The other thing that I find interesting is I know we talked about Glenlivet, not a peated whiskey, right? Not a heavily peated whiskey, but I do feel like on the older sample, I get a little hint of peat that I don't get at all in the modern sample.
Yeah. There might have been some in there. I don't know if they were, I mean, everybody was using peated malt at some point in the very, very long time ago, right? I don't know when they completely eliminated that. And then sometimes, you know, just a more robust maltiness can come across.
Kind of smell that.
Come across as peat.
Right, because I might be associating some of the peatier whiskeys I've had with also being more malty. So maybe I'm by no means a Scotch expert at all.
The challenge, I mean, and also the more I drink Scotch, the less I taste smoke. And that's also true, like mezcal. Like I don't taste smoke in mezcal really anymore.
Yeah.
And so it is like harder sometimes, like sometimes like people who don't drink a lot give you better evaluations of what things are.
No, that makes sense. All right. Well, definitely that same kind of fruity appley note, the apple in particular.
Much more subdued and a lot more vanilla. I think the fruitiness is softer. It's there. It's still Glenlivet, but it's much softer. There's a lot more vanilla, which makes me think that it's a way higher proportion of American oak.
That's what I was going to say. This is the bourbon influence, right?
And then that malty bitterness is there on the finish where it wasn't in the vintage bottle. Like I think the vintage bottling had a harsher ethanol element to it, where it was a little boozier, and so that might be harder for some new drinkers. But that pushed fruitiness. And it also obscured some of the bitter maltiness on the end. Whereas the bitter maltiness is a little more present on this.
Yeah, I get a little bit of a bitter element here, but it's not on the finish.
Yeah.
It's kind of about 3/4 of the way through the sip on the older one. Where the modern one, you really kind of, that's what you end with, is that bitter finish. Where here I kind of end with the fruitiness.
I could almost see some peat in this.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is that a little bit of maybe some smoky peaty element. That's cool.
And maybe more what people expected out of Scotch.
And by this, I mean the vintage.
The vintage
Yes,
one, right? Yeah, maybe more what people expected out of Scotchback.
Yeah, it's really curious. I don't know if that's peat in it or
Right.
just the way they did the barrels or the way they distilled. I can't imagine they changed distillation much. It seems like they're a set it and forget it. Like the Scotch industry in general.
Yeah.
Once they dial in a style, they do it. Unless they did probably change ownership.
Right.
Because I don't think Pernod Ricard owned it the whole time.
This is George and J.G. Smith that distilled in Scotland by them.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is before the consolidation purchase.
Yeah. And so that would potentially affect distillation and how they make it, because they've got to put this into, I'm assuming some of it goes to Chivas or a Pernod owned brand, right? And so they might want to make it work for their blends. But it's also such a strong single malt that I don't know if you mess with it.
Right. Well, I definitely like this vintage one better than the modern one.
Yes. If I could time travel, I would go back and purchase all the old Glenlivets and then
Yeah. You know, and dusty bottles, of course, have gotten even harder to get in recent years than they ever were. But this is definitely one that if I saw it on a vintage list somewhere, I might go, oh, I might be in the mood for that.
Yeah. Sometimes the power of suggestion makes you just want to like the old one better.
It's true.
But in this case, they are dramatically different.
Yeah.
And I think that when you read about the fruitiness that is in Glenlivet's whiskey, it shows through in the vintage bottling way more than the modern.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to try like a Nadura or something where in the modern era, they focus a lot more on high-end oak and higher proof.
Right.
And see if that vintage style shines through in a higher end bottling, and it might.
Right. And I think, you know, what's interesting also when you were saying, you know, this brand's doing this focus, right? And I think we're a little bit more in that these days because there are so many companies and so many bottles and everybody's trying to specialize to get their piece of the whiskey market.
Yeah.
And so you do get these, you know, more narrow slices where maybe this is sort of more generally appealing.
Yes.
I guess.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating. Really fun. This is cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for hosting me today. Anything else you want people to know?
Yeah, you should buy my book.
Buy your book.
So this is a book called Raising the Bar. It is written by myself and Jacob Grier. And the idea behind the book was that we were self-trained bartenders, both. And we really struggled back in the day of just putting together a cohesive bar at home and also professionally where we weren't just buying random stuff and then never using it again. And so what we did with this book was every chapter is a new bottle you add to your home bar. We teach you about it. And then we give you recipes that call for that bottle and only things that have come before.
That's great.
So as you work your way through the book, you never have to buy more than one bottle at a time. You're always buying bottles that you're going to be using and that you understand how to use. So it's by the end of the book, you have 25 bottles in your home bar, 230 recipes you can use. And as a professional bartender, I reference it all the time because it's the only book we have where I can make any recipe in this book right now. There's no infusions. There's no anything like that. It's like if I have a well-stocked bar, I can make every single recipe right now.
And that's sort of where I'm at with my own mixing these days. I used to make a lot of specialty syrups and things like that. And now I'm like, kind of like bottles.
Yeah, I like
take off shelf.
One of the fun things about bartending is the immediacy of hospitality. Like if you come over and you say, and I say, I want to make you dinner, you can't just be like, great, I loved braised short ribs. And I'll be like, let me work on that, you know? But you can say, I like a martini, and I can be like, I can have that for you in 2 minutes.
Yes.
And I love the immediacy of hospitality, and this book allows you to have that at home or in a professional bar.
That's awesome. Well, thank you. And where can people find you online if they want to know more about you?
I am on Instagram at Your Daily Brett. With dots in between the words, but yeah, you can find it. Yeah,
and Multnomah Whiskey Library online as well?
Yeah, MWL PDX. They can learn more about us. We're also on Instagram and all that, and we'd love to have you here. If you live in Portland, become a member, hang out.
And if you visit, come here.
Yeah.
Definitely worth a trip.
Absolutely.
And I am found at mytinybottles.com, where you can find out the story behind this little bottle of Glenlivet and all of the other Graham the other bottles from Grandma's collection. Oh, too much whiskey. You can also find me on social media. I'm at My Tiny Bottles on Instagram and Facebook, and Tammy LC on Blue Sky, which is the place that I post the most. Thank you again, and cheers.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe and share and follow and do all those things.